Good morning. I am so grateful for all that you have continued to do and done for my family, for me and my sister and my grandmother. We've had a month, I guess. I don't know. It's been a time. And we could not have done it without you. And I know that sounds very generic and very contrite, but it is also very true. I don't know why I'm this way, but I'm very much of the mindset that I have to do things myself. And so I just, when I found out about Mom, I just decided I was going to go home. And I was just going to go to my house, and I was going to pack up, and I was just going to leave, and that was going to be that. And I called Sean, and I talked to Zella because I came back, and we ran into each other. And I was not given that option to do it by myself, and that was probably for the best. I went home and had like 10 people in my house before I knew it, and I didn't even know where everyone had come from or when they'd gotten there. I'm very grateful. The day after my uncle's funeral, I was talking to my grandmother, and this is the highest compliment I can give you, I guess. I was talking to my grandmother, and she was telling me about just how impressed she was with the kindness and the things that you had done for us. And she told me that it made her feel like she needed to go back to church, and it meant more to me than I have words for. So just know that I am eternally indebted to you and will continue to be so. I know that a lot of you have questions and things that you've wanted to ask me, or things that you maybe have been scared to ask me, or that you just haven't had the time. I have had a hard time getting around to all of you, so I thought it might be useful or beneficial to put together a little PowerPoint with some question and answer, because that's how I like to deal with things. So I have some questions that I'm sure you're wondering, and some answers that maybe will help you. First is, Sam, how are you doing? My knee-jerk answer to that question is just to say that I am good or that I am making it, because I have this incessant need to be seen as okay. I'm doing as good as I can, I think, is the way that I would answer that question honestly right now. It is a lot, and some moments are better than others. Some days it's very overwhelming, and some days it's okay. And it just kind of oscillates between those two things. There's not really a pattern or a reason. It just is what it is. It's frustrating, it's overwhelming, but we're making it. When is Emma coming to see us? And I do mean us, because so many of you have come to see her, and she asks about you. She doesn't know your names, but she remembers what she did with you. So she asks about the people who took her on nature walks, or the people who played with Play-Doh with her, or the people who took her to pools, and she asks how you're doing and when she's going to get to see you again. Hopefully soon. It is legally a lot more complicated than I had hoped or expected that it would be. Right now, we cannot take Emma across state lines, and so she can't come here. But she's very excited about it, and hopefully will be awarded temporary guardianship, and then we can make decisions like that. We don't know exactly what's going to happen long term. I think at this point it's pretty clear that as long as me or my grandmother gets custody, she will be in Tennessee, and she won't be very far away. She might be very close. So that your prayers are very much appreciated in that situation, especially for the length of it. We just don't know. I would like this to be done quick. I don't know if it will be done quick. So your prayers are very much appreciated. Here's one that no one has directly asked me, but I've heard questions and murmurs, and that is just, oh wait, real quick, this is Emma, by the way. This is her last week. We found this dress, Mom had bought it for her, and so I took this picture, and I just wanted to share it with you. She's very big, she's missing a tooth. She's great. Are you going to move back to Alabama? The short answer to that question is no, and then the long answer to that question is no. Thank you for appreciating that joke. I didn't know if that would... I thought of that, and I was like, oh, this is good, and I really just didn't know how it was going to go over. I have no intention of leaving for any reason whatsoever. That has not even kind of crossed my mind. You have all been incredibly loyal to me through this time, and I hope you realize that that is not one-sided. I have so much love in my heart for the Portland Church of Christ. It has been so hard for me to be away from the Portland Church of Christ for the past 3 weeks. I don't enjoy being gone. It is not one of those things where I'm like eager to get back. I mean, I love seeing my family. I love being there with Emma, but I also love being with my family here. So that's not something that I'm contemplating. You will have to work much harder to get rid of me. Again, I am very grateful. I thought for a long time that I had done the hardest things that I was going to do. Mom and I never really had it easy, and so that was kind of how I got through things, was this very comparative way of thinking of like, well, it could always be worse, because it could be this thing. And then I was not able to do that, and I did not know. Those first couple days were very touch and go there, and you guys kept me in it, so thank you for that. From the depths of my soul, I cry out, Lord, can you hear me? Have mercy, O God, in the midst of the sea I cry out. The water is over my head, and there is a time to mourn. There is a time to weep. That's part of the song, Deep Calls to Deep. In the last part, those last few words of there is a time to weep are the words of Ecclesiastes chapter 3, verse 4. You know what's interesting to me? God followers throughout history have recognized and embraced this reality and did so in their worship to God. It wasn't as if they cried their tears and gathered their composure and blew their nose, wiped their eyes, and then worshiped together. Our spiritual forefathers would often choose lament as the avenue for their worship to God. Over a third of the Psalms are Psalms of lament. The book of Lamentations is a whole lament over the destruction of Jerusalem. Jesus spent some of his last hours on earth lamenting the fate that was before him. Lament is more than just sorrow and pain. Lament is talking to God about pain, both individually and collectively as a church. And the modern church is a bit out of practice, perhaps, on that front. Here's something else that's interesting to me. Christians in 2021, at least here in the Western Hemisphere, have in large part moved away from lament in favor of a more consistently upbeat worship style. Songs and tones that are often relentlessly cheery. And it's not a bad thing in any way to have upbeat songs and cheery worship, because we have so much to be thankful for. And we would do well to learn and practice new ways to celebrate all of the exciting and extraordinary ways that God continues to bless us. It's just that the happy, joyous stuff is not always all that is going on. On any given week, we have plenty to lament, don't we? So if that's the case, and if we have plenty to lament, why don't we do it more? Not all the time, but more. And I think there are a few reasons, a few things that keep us from doing that. For one, a fear of what we think might be arguing with God, because whatever that is, it's probably not okay, so we better stay very far away from it. Or for another thing, we might just doubt the effectiveness of lament. What's it really going to do anyways? Or another thing that keeps us from entering this more often is the attitude of, hey, we're big boys and big girls, let's not whine. After all, God has bigger problems to worry about than our own junk, right? Maybe you're like me, and it is simply because I don't like crying in front of people. It makes me angry. In fact, the only time that I really got mad, and it was irrationally so, the first few days, was when there were people in my house and I was crying because I was mad that they were seeing me cry, and I don't like when people witness that because, again, I really like to be okay, or at least be seen that way. Or maybe it's just because we don't like conflict, and so we don't want to address it, because if we don't address it, then it's not real, and then we don't have to work through it. Whatever the reason is, I think the practice of lament in worship has fallen out of favor in Western Christianity, and so it feels foreign, at least to me. Lament is this very healthy acknowledgement of the reality of suffering around us. It says, I am not going to ignore or numb myself to the fact that things are not right. And there's something good in that decision. In lament, we become like the woman with an issue of blood, you may remember, who seeks Jesus out and grabs his cloak in the middle of the crowd in an attempt to finally be delivered from her problem. She's desperate. You could probably even argue that she's a little bit pushy. But you can't deny the fact that Jesus does heal her. You see, what she does is an act of faith, and our worship to God and the things that we communicate in our worship can be similar. Maybe we think that calling out to God about the bad things that are going on around us would be a breach of some kind of rule or contract, a demonstration that we're not as faith-filled as we should be, a demonstration that we're not as close to God as we ought to be. But that is not true, because lament is more an act of intimacy than one of distance. And I have just personally felt like lately that there's been a lot to lament. It seems like for the past 3 or 4 weeks, at least in my world, that this torrent began and has not let up. And because of that, I made the decision to do something that I don't normally do and change my lesson schedule. If you're not aware of this, Sean and I both plan out what we're going to teach in our Bible classes and in our sermons pretty far in advance. And I don't love change, and so I very rarely deviate from my plans. But I was doing a series on Genesis before this, and I sat down and I tried to type out that lesson and work on that, and it just felt disingenuous. That wasn't really what was on my heart or where my mind was at, and so that's not what I decided to do. So I'm just giving you a heads up that if you're new or you're visiting, what we're doing this morning is probably going to be a little bit different than what we normally do. And so if you walk out of here and you go, that was different, it was. And, come back next week and we'll have our gospel meeting. And the week after that, Sean will be here. As far as I know, I don't think either of them are going through emotional turmoil right now. So it'll probably be a little bit more business as usual after this. But I just feel like because of the things that have happened, and not just in my life, but in our lives as a community, because I do understand that this is bigger than me, and I'm not the only person who is going through hard times, and there have been other struggles while I've been away, and I've tried to keep up and be a part of that in any way that I could. I thought it might be good for us to come to this place of lament and stay here for a while. So what we're going to do is, as we go through the stages of lament that the early church would sometimes use in their worship, I've updated the vernacular a little bit so it's more in our tongue, and I use common forms of it from people who've studied lament and its practice and what it looked like. And there are 4 parts traditionally of lament, 4 ideas that the church would work through. And we're going to enter each part and work through each of those ideas and pull some inspiration from some of the Psalms that they would have used. I know I've said this, but I'll just repeat myself. I am so grateful for this church family. I could keep you here all day and well into this week, listing things that have been done for me or my sister or my grandmother. You have been and continue to be, in various and sundry ways, a part of this journey. You have walked with me through it literally every step of the way since I found out. And so I felt it was only appropriate to include you in my lament as I walk through some of this internally. And so that's what we're going to do. I hope you don't mind. So the first movement of lament, as we are going to look at it together this morning, is this: God, things are bad. You get a lot of this in the Psalms. I don't know where it was that I developed this happy, rosy picture of the Psalms. Maybe I'd heard too many highlights. Maybe it's the fact that we call it the songbook of the Old Testament. I don't know. But I had this idea in my head that it was just like all major chords, right? That it was all good notes, high praise, things that were exciting and fun. But if you've ever spent time actually like really just tucked away reading the Psalms and working through them, you find out that it's not all high notes, that there is gritty and heavy stuff. And one example of that is Psalm 42. And it's funny because this is one that I would have thought, even in just some of the words that it uses and the way that it's read and the songs that we take from it, I'd assumed for a long time that it was one of those happy, rosy, major chord psalms. But you look more into it and you realize, oh, there's something deeper going on there. Psalm 42 begins and it says, "As the deer pants for streams of water." And by the way, I know this is a heavier one, a heavier lesson, at least coming from me, I guess. I don't know. So just a little bit of comedic relief in this. I've told you before, I didn't grow up in the church. I didn't grow up reading the Bible, really. And so I distinctly remember the first time that I went to church and we sang this song, and I remember seeing it on the screen. I had no real experience with the Bible, and I definitely didn't know that like this was something that came from the Bible. And so I just saw the title, like "As the Deer Pants," and I was just very confused because my mind immediately went to a deer wearing pants. And then I decided that that was ridiculous. And it was obviously probably about pants made from deer, like a nice, like, I don't know, calfskin thing or something. Apparently, not what that's about. So I'm still a little surprised by that. Anyways, as the deer pants for streams of water, so my soul pants for you, my God. It is really nice that someone would love God that much, that they would long for God, that the relationship would be something that they desire so strongly. You know what's not nice, though? That they are in a place where they are longing for it in the first place. That they are in a place when they are thirsting for it. You don't thirst for water when it's right in front of you. You thirst when distance has been created, when you've been separated from the source of water. That's the time that this psalm grows out of. As the deer pants for streams of water means that that deer is not anywhere close to water. It would drink if it could. My soul thirsts for God, for the living God. When can I go and meet with God. In other words, when am I going to be reunited? The psalmist is acknowledging this distance, this feeling of separation, because clearly in their mind, he is not in the picture right now. When can I go and just meet with God? My tears have been my food day and night. That sounds like a debilitating, depressing fast. Have you ever cried hard? I mean, those times where the crying burns, where you just feel spent. And when you stop crying, it's not because anything has been resolved, but just because you can't cry anymore. And it's this kind of crying that empties you, the kind of crying that you really can't do unless you are somehow both fully alive and also dying inside. I imagine that's the kind of crying that's being described in Psalm 42, verse 3. My tears have been my food day and night, while people say to me all day long, "Where is your God?" Sometimes, at least I do, we find ourselves in this place where we want to say, we always know you're here, God, but we don't always know what you're doing, and we would be lying if we said that didn't frustrate us at times. We don't always know what you're doing, and we wish we did. And so when addiction and disease continue to ravage the lives of so many people in our community, we can openly and honestly say, God, things are bad. And when you hope and dream about a new family or a new child, and those hopes and dreams are so unceremoniously stripped away and taken from you, you can say, God, things are bad. And when layoffs close in and bills pile up, and foreclosure loom, we say, God, things are bad. And when conflict presses down and the timbers of marriage start to creak and splinter, we say, God, things are bad. Every single time that Emma asks me when mommy's coming home and how we're going to bring her back, I find myself saying, God, things are very, very bad. And when sin won't go away, and addiction and idolatry and fear take crowbars to our bond with God, we say openly and honestly, not alone, but as a community, God, things are bad. And sometimes it is so bad that it makes you want to cry or shout or curse or scream, and it makes you want to cry inside of a storm shelter and lock yourself away and not come out until everything is all over, but you can't do that, so you just ask, when will it end? Because really, I just need to know that it's going to end eventually, because it's too much for me. And so that really leads nicely into the second moment of lament. God, save us. The psalmist continues in Psalm 42, my soul is downcast within me, therefore I will remember you from the land of Jordan, the heights of Hermon from Mount Mizar. Deep calls to deep in the roar of your waterfalls, all your waves and breakers have swept over me. I don't know exactly what the psalmist is saying in this deep calls to deep section. Deep calls to deep in the roar of your waterfalls, all your waves and breakers have swept over me. It could be that he's saying in all of this chaos and all of the white water, it's like I'm caught in the middle of a shouting match between deep seas. It's deafening, it's confusing, it's this cacophony of sound and chaos, and I am overwhelmed by it. He might be saying that the deepest chasms of his soul are calling out to be filled by the immeasurable depths of your spirit. That the deep void of his soul calls the deep void of emptiness, and he's asking God to come in and fill both of those things, to fill the hole of loss and to fill the emptiness in his spirit. That could be it. Either way, I think we are meant to connect with the idea of depths here. Catherine C. Kerr wrote a book on lament. It inspired a lot of this lesson. I highly recommend it. And she says, we find ourselves in the depths, and down there in the depths of pain and loss and abandonment, we can't help but look up through the murkiness to the surface and think of what it felt like in the sun. With the view obscured for now, and the friends that wave at us from those heights look like ghosts so distorted and hazy, or their well wishes by the distance we feel from them, and the reality of our circumstances from the deep, it is oft hard to connect to the surface. But in the deep, we are never alone, and so deep calls to deep at the thunder of your waterfalls, and we beg God, Lord, save us. We ask God to save us from a few things. We ask God to save us from ourselves, from our own weakness, the maddening ways and the foolish choices that we so often make, the stuff that we could have avoided and yet choose not to. Those foolish choices that we've made so many times before. That's the worst part for most of us. We ask God to save us from addiction, from chains that shackle our body and minds, from idols that demand giant sacrifices and promise these things in return, and then take all we offer and give us none of what they promised in return. We ask God to save us from sin, from every insidious bit of it. We say, Lord, save us from death and destruction, and we ask God to save us from others, from cruelty, from the perverted pleasure that others sometimes take in hurting us, to save us from thoughtlessness and the shrapnel that flies when others forget that their choices impact those around them, to save us from oppression, the pressure that comes when others decide they can only be tall when standing on the backs of those they deem less than, to save us from war. When waves of humanity clash and everyone drowns, we say individually, collectively, communally, God, Lord, save us. The morning that we went to arrange everything for Mom's funeral, Sean took me to breakfast. He came down that morning to see me, and before we ate, he said a prayer, and I don't know if he knew how much it would stick with me. But before we ate, he prayed that God and his people would overwhelm us, me and Emma, with blessings in the coming days and weeks and months. And I stopped listening after that because I thought it was just such an interesting idea, such a powerful idea that God would bless us so richly that our cups could run over, that we'd be overwhelmed by blessings and goodness in a time like that. Because if I'm being honest with you, over the past few weeks, overwhelmed is a very apt word to describe how I've felt, but not in a good way. It has often felt like I'm drowning in just everything that's happening because there just doesn't seem to be any end to it. But that made me think that same sense of drowning, of there not being an end to it, and applying that idea not to the bad things that were going on, but to the goodness that God could show us, and to the goodness that God's people could show us, and asking him to do that in a moment like that. I mean, it honestly seemed kind of ridiculous. Because why would you make a request that big of God in a moment like that? And the reason why I think is because Sean knew that God can do that. And that's the third act of this movement of lament. God, things are bad. Save us. God, we know you can. Psalm 74 is one of the lament psalms that we referenced earlier, if you're not aware of that. It's probably one of the most well-known lament psalms, and it says in verse 13, "It was you who split open the sea. By your power you broke the heads of the monster in the waters. It was you who crushed the heads of Leviathan and gave it as food to the creatures of the desert. It was you who opened up springs and streams. The day is yours, and yours also is the night. It was you who set all the boundaries of the earth. You made both summer and winter." My God is not helpless, and your God is not helpless. He made the Grand Canyon and the Amazon rainforest and the Pacific Ocean and Jupiter and the Andromeda Galaxy. He made mankind from the dust, and he conquered sin and death, and he is filled with power, overflowing with it even. Enough power for us to stand and just bask in it. Enough power to do things that we never dreamed up. Enough power to take us to magnificent places that we never dared to imagine. And so we ask God to use that power to help us. And we say, God, we know you can. We look at what he did with David against Goliath at the valley of Elah, and we ask him to do it again against our giants. And we say, we know you can, Lord. And we read about the way he fed the Israelites in the wilderness, this place that had such stingy soil, and we ask for crops in our own deserts, and we say, we know you can do that, Lord. And we read about how he brought the Red Sea down on a group of oppressors, and we beg him for our own freedom from our grief and our distress, and we say, we know that you can do that, Lord. And we know the Apostle Paul calls him the God of all comfort, and we plead for comfort in our grief, and we declare as a faith community, we know that you can, Lord. I've been here for 2 years. My 2-year anniversary was in the middle of this, so I didn't really get to, celebrate or acknowledge it, I guess, in the way that I would like to. But I've been here for 2 years now, and I have seen many people struggle with deaths, with marriage, with loss of loved ones, with personal, marital, professional struggles. I have seen people go through storms. You've seen people go through storms. And I have seen God bring them out of those storms and heal them and renew them in unimaginable and amazing ways that they were not capable of doing on their own. And when I see that, it makes it easier for me to say, I know you can, Lord, because I've seen him do it over and over in different and amazing ways. I think of different ways that I've seen God work through and provide for other people just in this church family. And as I've been here, and I think of the absolutely ridiculous prayer that Sean gave in the middle of a Chick-fil-A, because they're open in Alabama for some reason. Tennessee really needs to get their act together. And I realize that it's not quite so ridiculous, and I begin to think to myself, I know you can, Lord. I have said, I think I've done lessons before, and mentioned that my favorite chapter in the whole Bible is Zephaniah chapter 3. I think it's wonderful. Zephaniah, if you're not familiar with it, is this book in the Minor Prophets where God is basically just fed up with the nation of Israel. And he's talking about, in chapters 1 and 2, he's talking about all of the ways he's going to punish them and just really how horrible it's going to be. But there's this pivot in chapter 3 where he starts to talk about how he's already anticipating them returning to him and all of the ways that he's already planning and the ways that he's plotting to save them and redeem them despite their own shortcomings. And then verse 17 of chapter 3, which is probably my favorite verse in the whole Bible, has also my favorite description of God in it, where it says that the Lord your God, the mighty warrior in your midst, is mighty to save. God, things are bad. To varying degrees, things are bad. Save us. We know you can. And that same knowledge that gives us hope, ironically, sometimes creates angst within us, doesn't it? Because we know that there's more than this. We know that more is possible. It can be better than this. And that it would be, that it will be. And knowing all of that, and knowing how much better it could be, would be maddening if not for the fact that because we believe the promises of God, we know that one day it will be better than this. And so when we say, Lord, save us, we not only affirm that we know he can, we are also able to say him, and this is the fourth and final thing, God, we know you will. This is why so many of even the thorniest, gnarliest lament psalms end in hope. Psalm 42, the deer pants, buckskin psalm, ends after chronicling all of that trouble with these words. Why, my soul, are you downcast? Why so disturbed within me? Put your hope in God, for I will yet praise him, my Savior and my God. I like how the psalmist is almost chastising himself there. Like, how did you forget? Did you not see how this story was going to end? The good guy wins, and God comes back, and he saves you. You should know that. Here's where we hope in harmony. We hope together often, whether we're consciously aware of it or not. Our songs, our messages, our prayers are just littered with and tied together often by hope. Hope that people can change, hope that illnesses can be cured, hope that diseases will be ridden of, that wars will end, that people can be better than they are today, and that God will come back. We do so much hoping as a community. In the context of lament, though, hope is made specific and necessary. Without lament, our hope can be nebulous and auxiliary at times, very pie-in-the-sky type stuff. In lament, hope gains gravity and force. Often our hope is like a rainbow. It is visible, but it is simultaneously very distant and impossible to grab. If hope, though, takes the form of a man coming to save us, a true story, a specific and personal answer to my pain, if hope is the natural culmination of the story that we are living as God followers, then hope matters. Then hope takes root and it grows wing and it changes from night to day. We read promises like the Psalms, but do we realize when we read those promises, we are looking forward to a new heaven and a new earth where righteousness dwells? We read these words, behold, I am making all things new. And we trust that he will. We trust that God is with us in the valley because he's told us that he's with us in the valley and that he's going to eventually, one way or the other, deliver us from it. Catherine Kerr says that the mindset, that the we believe you will mindset, does not ignore the reality of suffering and pain, but it points to the truth that they are never the final word in your story. And so we say together, even in all of this, we believe you will, Lord. We defer to your wisdom. We surrender to your timing, but we don't give up hope and we don't wish for rescue. We hope for it, and that's very different. We hope, we wait, we ask for it, and we ask for you to rescue us, and in the same breath we affirm, we know that you're going to. That part has already been written. Because we trust him and we trust his promises, we can look ahead to the day when he makes all things new, and we stand taller and we say together, we believe, we know that you will, Lord. I want to leave you with 2 Corinthians chapter 6. I've read this passage a lot over the past few weeks. It has been of particular comfort to me. It's written by the Apostle Paul, who was no stranger to suffering and heartache and grief and loss, who had many things in his life to lament at many different times. And here's what Paul says, starting in verse 8. Through glory and dishonor, bad report and good report, genuine yet regarded as impostors, known yet regarded as unknown, dying and yet we live on, beaten and yet not killed, sorrowful yet always rejoicing, poor yet making many rich, having nothing and yet possessing everything. We travel on, and someday God will bring us fully into our inheritance. He will vanquish sickness and sin and even death, and he will wipe away every single tear from our eyes, and that day is coming, and we will rise to experience it in faith with those who've gone on before. I'm so excited to see my mom again. That's really the only thing that's made this not terrible. And so on this day, and every day until then, we look to him and we say, we believe you will, Lord. I don't really have a traditional invitation thought. I guess I would say that all of this is found in Christ. And if you don't have access to that yet, to that hope that we have spent so much time talking about, it is free for you right here, right now, today, and for the rest of your life, and we'd love to help you find that. If there is anything we can do for you as a church, won't you come as we stand and as we sing?